Shawna Forde grew up in Everett, Washington, and seemed like an ordinary woman for most of her life. She worked various jobs, had children, and lived what appeared to be a normal middle-class existence. But beneath the surface, Forde harbored extreme anti-immigration views that would eventually lead her down a dark path. In the early 2000s, Forde became involved with border vigilante groups. She believed illegal immigration was destroying America and felt the government was not doing enough to stop it. Forde joined several groups that patrolled the border between Arizona and Mexico, looking for people crossing illegally. She eventually founded her own organization called Minutemen American Defense, or MAD. Forde's group was more extreme than others. While most border groups focused on reporting illegal crossings to authorities, MAD talked about taking direct action. Forde believed they needed funding to expand their operations and began planning ways to get money through any means necessary. In 2009, Forde met Jason Eugene Bush, a man with white supremacist beliefs and a criminal history. Bush shared her extreme views about immigration and was willing to use violence to advance their cause. Together with Albert Gaxiola, a local man who knew the area, they began planning home invasions to steal money and drugs from people they claimed were involved in drug trafficking. Forde's group targeted Hispanic families, believing they would be easy victims who would not report incidents to police due to their immigration status. They planned to use stolen money to fund their border operations and buy weapons and equipment. On May 30, 2009, Forde and her accomplices put their plan into action. They chose the home of Raul Flores in Arivaca, Arizona, a small town near the border. Flores lived there with his wife Gina and their 9-year-old daughter Brazenia. The family was legally in the United States and had no connection to drug trafficking. Around 1 a.m., the group approached the Flores home. Forde knocked on the door, claiming to be law enforcement looking for fugitives. When Raul Flores opened the door, Bush and Gaxiola forced their way inside with weapons drawn. They demanded money and drugs, refusing to believe the family when they said they had neither. What happened next was a massacre. Bush shot Raul Flores, causing his death instantly. As Gina Flores begged for her life and her daughters, Bush shot her as well. But Gina survived the initial shot and played deceased. 9-year-old Brazenia was awake and crying, terrified by what was happening to her parents. In an act of unspeakable cruelty, Bush walked over to the little girl and shot her in the head, ending her life immediately. The individual affected had done nothing except be born into a family that these extremists had targeted because of their race. After the shootings, Forde and her group ransacked the house looking for money and valuables. They found almost nothing of value, realizing they had unalived an innocent family for no gain. As they prepared to leave, Gina Flores, still alive despite her wounds, managed to call 911. When police arrived, they found Gina wounded but conscious. She was able to give descriptions of the attackers and details about what they had said. The investigation quickly focused on anti-immigration groups operating in the area. Forde initially tried to provide alibis for herself and her accomplices. She claimed they were nowhere near Arivaca that night, but phone records and witness statements contradicted her story. Gina Flores positively identified all 3 attackers, and evidence tied them to the scene. As the investigation continued, authorities learned about Forde's extremist views and her plans to fund MAD through robbery and theft. They discovered that the Flores family had been targeted specifically because of their ethnicity, not because of any suspected criminal activity. Forde was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree offense, 1 count of attempted first-degree offense, burglary, armed robbery, and aggravated assault. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that the incidents were especially heinous and cruel. During her trial in 2011, Forde showed little remorse for her actions. She maintained that she was fighting to protect America from invasion, even as evidence showed she had participated in taking the life of an innocent child and her father. The jury found her guilty on all counts. In the penalty phase, Forde's defense team tried to portray her as a woman who had been radicalized by extremist groups. They argued that she genuinely believed she was protecting her country, even though her methods were wrong. The prosecution countered that Forde was a cold-blooded individual who had targeted an innocent family based on race and had shown no mercy to a 9-year-old child. The jury recommended death, and the judge sentenced Shawna Forde to death by lethal injection. She was also sentenced to life in prison for the attempted offense of Gina Flores. Bush was also sentenced to death, while Gaxiola received life in prison. Forde remains on death row at the Arizona State Correctional Facility complex in Perryville. Her case became a symbol of how extremist anti-immigration views can lead to deadly violence against innocent people. Taylor Wren Parker was a 27-year-old woman living in Sims, Texas, who appeared to have everything going for her. She was in a relationship with Wade Griffin and seemed happy and successful, but Parker was living a dangerous lie that would lead to one of the most horrific incidents in recent Texas history. For months, Parker had been telling everyone, including her boyfriend Griffin, that she was pregnant. She posted photos of her growing belly on social media and talked constantly about her upcoming baby. Parker even went so far as to plan a gender reveal party and baby shower. Everyone believed her pregnancy was real, including Griffin, who was excited to become a father. But Parker was not actually pregnant. She had been using prosthetics and other tricks to fake her pregnancy for months. As her supposed due date approached, Parker knew she would need to produce a real baby or her elaborate deception would be exposed. She began planning the unthinkable. She would steal someone else's baby. Parker chose Regan Simmons Hancock as her target. Regan was a 21-year-old woman who lived in New Boston, Texas, and was 8 months pregnant with her first child, a daughter she planned to name Braxlyn Sage. Regan was friendly and trusting, which made her an easy target for Parker's deadly plan. The two women had met through mutual friends and had become acquaintances. Regan had no idea that Parker was plotting against her. On October 9, 2020, Parker contacted Regan under the pretense of buying a dog from her. Regan agreed to meet, trusting Parker as someone she knew. Parker drove to Regan's home in New Boston that morning. She brought weapons with her, including a scalpel and knives. When Regan opened the door, Parker attacked her with savage brutality. The assault that followed was beyond horrific. Parker beat and stabbed Regan over and over again. The individual affected sustained more than 100 wounds during the attack. Parker showed no mercy as Regan fought for her life and the life of her unborn daughter. The violence was so extreme that blood was found throughout Regan's home. After unaliving Regan, Parker carried out the most disturbing part of her plan. She cut open Regan's abdomen and removed baby Braxlyn from her mother's womb. The baby was still alive when Parker took her, but was critically injured from the attack. Parker fled the scene with the dying infant. Parker drove to a hospital in Marshall, Texas with the baby, claiming she had just given birth in her car. Medical staff immediately realized something was wrong. Parker showed no signs of having recently given birth, and the baby was clearly in distress from trauma, not normal birth complications. Baby Braxlyn passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. Meanwhile, police had discovered Regan's body at her home. The scene was so horrific that seasoned investigators were traumatized. Regan had been slashed and beaten hundreds of times. The evidence showed that she had fought desperately to survive and protect her unborn child. The investigation quickly led police to Parker. Hospital staff had already reported their suspicions about her claims of giving birth. When investigators learned about Parker's fake pregnancy and her connection to Regan, they knew they had found their suspect. Forensic evidence linked Parker to the crime scene. Her DNA was found at Regan's home, and Regan's DNA was found in Parker's vehicle. Surveillance footage showed Parker's car in Regan's neighborhood on the morning of the attack. Phone records confirmed that Parker had contacted Regan to arrange their meeting. Parker was arrested and charged with a capital offense for the deaths of both Regan and baby Braxlyn. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but Parker maintained her innocence and claimed she had been attacked by an unknown assailant while trying to help Regan. During her trial in 2022, the prosecution presented evidence of Parker's elaborate deception about her pregnancy. They showed how she had planned the attack for months and had specifically targeted Regan for her baby. The defense tried to argue that Parker suffered from mental illness, but the evidence showed clear premeditation and planning. The jury heard horrifying testimony about the extent of Regan's injuries and the suffering both she and her baby had endured. Parker had shown no mercy to a young woman who was excited to become a mother or to an innocent baby who never had a chance at life. After just 1 hour of deliberation, the jury found Tyler Parker guilty of a capital offense on October 3, 2022. During the penalty phase, the prosecution argued that Parker's actions were so heinous and calculated that she deserved death. They emphasized that she had not just unalived one person but had taken the lives of both a mother and her unborn child. On November 9, 2022, Parker was sentenced to death by lethal injection. At 29 years old, she became one of the youngest women on Texas death row. The judge agreed with the jury that her incidents were especially cruel and deserving of the ultimate punishment. Parker is currently housed at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has begun the appeals process that could take years or even decades. Her case shocked the nation and highlighted the extreme lengths someone will go to maintain a lie, even if it means taking innocent lives. Christa Gail Pike was just 18 years old when she became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the modern era of capital punishment. Born in West Virginia, Pike had a troubled childhood marked by abuse and instability. By her teens, she was involved with drugs and had dropped out of school. She ended up in Knoxville, Tennessee, enrolled in a job training program at the Tennessee Technology Center. Pike was dating Tadderil Shipp, a 17-year-old with his own criminal history. She was obsessed with him and extremely jealous of any female attention he received. Pike had also become fascinated with the occult and satanic practices. She carved pentagrams into her skin and talked constantly about darkness and evil. At the job training center, Pike met 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, a student from Florida. Slemmer was friendly and outgoing, everything that Pike was not. When Pike became convinced that Slemmer was trying to steal Shipp away from her, her jealousy turned deadly. Pike began planning what she called teaching Colleen a lesson. On January 12, 1995, Pike convinced Slemmer to take a walk with her, Shipp, and another friend, 18-year-old Shatala Peterson. They told Slemmer they wanted to smoke marijuana in a secluded area of the University of Tennessee agricultural campus. Slemmer trusted them and agreed to go. Once they reached the isolated woods, Pike's plan unfolded. She and Shipp attacked Slemmer without warning. What happened next was beyond brutal. Pike and Shipp tortured Slemmer for over 30 minutes. They beat her with a box cutter and a small knife. Pike carved a pentagram into Slemmer's chest while she was still alive. The individual affected begged for her life, promising she would leave Knoxville and never return. But Pike was not finished. She picked up a chunk of concrete and smashed Slemmer's skull repeatedly. Even after the individual affected was clearly deceased, Pike continued her attack. She kept a piece of Slemmer's skull as a trophy, carrying it around and showing it to friends. Pike bragged about what she had done and threatened other girls who she thought were interested in Shipp. The investigation began when Slemmer was reported missing by concerned friends. Her body was found the next day in the woods. The scene was so horrific that seasoned investigators were shaken. The medical examiner determined that Slemmer had suffered at least 100 wounds before passing away. Pike's bragging quickly led police to her door. She had been showing off the skull fragment and telling people details about the offense. When arrested, Pike showed no remorse. She seemed proud of what she had done and made statements about how she enjoyed causing Slemmer pain. During questioning, Pike confessed to planning and carrying out the attack. She said she unalived Slemmer because she believed the individual affected was after her boyfriend. Pike described the torture in chilling detail, showing investigators exactly how she had carved the pentagram and beaten Slemmer with the concrete. The trial began in March 1996. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Pike's guilt, including her confession and the skull fragment found in her possession. They painted her as a cold-blooded individual who tortured an innocent person out of jealous rage. Pike's defense team tried to argue that her troubled childhood and possible mental illness should spare her from the death penalty. They brought in experts who testified about her history of abuse and unstable home life. But the jury was not swayed by these arguments. After deliberating, the jury found Christa Pike guilty of first-degree offense and conspiracy. During the penalty phase, they recommended death. The judge agreed and sentenced Pike to death by electrocution. At 20 years old when sentenced, she became the youngest woman on death row. Pike has been in the correctional facility for over 25 years. She has exhausted most of her appeals and remains on death row at the Tennessee Prison for Women in Nashville. Her case continues to draw attention because of her young age at the time of the offense and the extreme brutality of the incident. Christie Scott was a 30-year-old mother living in Russellville, Alabama, with her husband Jeremy and their 2 young sons. She appeared to be a devoted mother to 4-year-old Noah, but struggled with her older son, 6-year-old Mason, who had been diagnosed with autism. Mason required special care and attention, which created stress for Christie, who found it difficult to handle his needs. Christie worked various jobs to help support the family while Jeremy often traveled for work. Money was tight, and Christie worried constantly about their financial situation. She had taken out life insurance policies on both her children, which seemed like responsible parenting at the time. But by August 2008, Christie's attitude toward Mason had grown darker. She became frustrated with his autism-related behaviors and seemed to resent the extra care he required. Friends and family noticed that Christie treated Noah with obvious affection while showing little patience with Mason. On August 15, 2008, Christie made a disturbing decision. She contacted her father and asked him to help her increase the life insurance coverage on her children. Within 12 hours, she had raised Mason's policy from $75,000 to $175,000. This dramatic increase in coverage just hours before Mason's death would later become crucial evidence against her. The next evening, August 16, 2008, Jeremy was out of town on business, leaving Christie alone with both boys. Around 1:30 a.m., neighbors were awakened by the smell of smoke and the sound of Christie screaming for help. Her house was on fire, and Christie was standing outside with 4-year-old Noah. Christie told neighbors that Mason was still inside the burning house. She claimed she had tried to rescue him, but could not reach him because of the flames and smoke. Firefighters rushed into the house to search for Mason, but the fire was too intense. They found the little boy's body in his bedroom, where he had passed away from smoke inhalation and burns. At first, the fire appeared to be a tragic accident. Christie played the role of a devastated mother who had lost her child in a horrible incident. She received sympathy from the community and support from family and friends who believed she was grieving the loss of her son. But fire investigators began to notice things that did not match Christie's story. The burn patterns in the house suggested the fire had been deliberately set using an accelerant. Laboratory tests confirmed the presence of gasoline throughout the house, particularly in Mason's bedroom, where the fire had burned hottest. The investigation revealed that Christie had poured gasoline around the house and in Mason's room before setting the fire. She had made sure Noah was safe before starting the blaze, but had left Mason inside to perish in the flames. The timing of the increased life insurance policy raised immediate red flags about her motive. Police discovered that Christie had been researching house fires and insurance claims in the days before the incident. She had also made suspicious purchases of gasoline containers and other materials that could be used to start a fire. Her computer search history showed she had been looking up information about how fires spread and how to make them look accidental. During questioning, Christie maintained her innocence and insisted the fire had been an accident, or possibly the work of an arsonist. She claimed she loved Mason and would never hurt him, but the physical evidence contradicted every part of her story. Christie was arrested and charged with a capital offense for Mason's death. The prosecution argued that she had unalived her autistic son for the life insurance money because she found him burdensome and difficult to care for. They presented evidence showing that Christie had planned the fire carefully and had deliberately left Mason inside to perish. The trial revealed disturbing details about Christie's treatment of Mason in the months before his death. Witnesses testified that she had grown increasingly impatient with Mason's autism-related behaviors. She had complained about the cost and difficulty of caring for him, and had shown obvious favoritism toward Noah. Christie's defense team tried to argue that she was a loving mother who would never harm her child. They suggested that the fire might have been started by someone else, or that it was an accident that got out of control. But they could not explain away the evidence of accelerant, or the timing of the insurance increase. The prosecution emphasized that Christie had made a cold calculation, that Mason was worth more to her deceased than alive. They argued that she had viewed her autistic son as a burden, and had decided to solve her financial problems by taking his life and collecting the insurance money. After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Christie Scott guilty of a capital offense on August 7, 2009. During the penalty phase, the prosecution argued that her actions were especially heinous because she had betrayed the most basic trust between mother and child. They pointed out that Mason had been helpless and had trusted Christie to protect him, not harm him. The jury recommended death, and the judge sentenced Christie to death by lethal injection on August 12, 2009. She became one of only 5 women on Alabama's death row. The case shocked the community because it involved a mother deliberately taking the life of her own disabled child for money. Christie has been housed at the Julia Tutwiler Correctional Facility for women in DeWitt, Ka, Alabama, for over 15 years. She has exhausted most of her appeals, with the Alabama Supreme Court upholding her conviction and sentence. Her case serves as a tragic example of how financial stress and resentment can lead someone to commit the ultimate betrayal of their parental responsibilities. Mary Ellen Samuels was known as the Green Widow for her obsession with money and willingness to take lives for it. In the late 1980s, Samuels was married to Robert Bob Samuels, a successful camera operator who worked on major Hollywood films including Lethal Weapon. Bob was living his dream working in the movie industry, but Mary Ellen saw Bob as worth more deceased than alive. The couple was going through divorce proceedings that had dragged on for 26 months. Mary Ellen realized that if Bob passed away, she would inherit his life insurance money, his share of their Subway sandwich shop franchise, and other assets totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. For 2 years, Mary Ellen planned Bob's death while pretending to work toward reconciliation. She researched different methods and looked for someone willing to commit the offense for money. Mary Ellen was methodical and patient, waiting for the right opportunity to carry out her scheme. In 1988, Mary Ellen found her hitman in Robert Bernstein, a man willing to take Bob's life for payment. She hired Bernstein to eliminate her husband, promising him money for carrying out the attack. She provided Bernstein with information about Bob's schedule and habits to help him plan the assault. On December 8, 1988, Bernstein carried out Mary Ellen's plan by shooting and unaliving Bob Samuels at their Northridge, California home. Bob was found deceased by family members, apparently the individual affected of what appeared to be a burglary gone wrong. Mary Ellen played the role of a grieving widow while secretly celebrating her success. But Mary Ellen's greed created a new problem. Bernstein knew too much about her involvement in Bob's death, and could implicate her if caught. Mary Ellen decided that Bernstein needed to be eliminated to protect herself from discovery. In June 1989, Mary Ellen hired 2 new hitmen, Mike Gall and another associate, to take Bernstein's life. She offered Gall $5,000 to eliminate Bernstein before she left for vacation in Cancun. Mary Ellen also agreed to forgive a loan as additional payment for the hit. Bernstein was found deceased in Ventura County in June 1989, making Mary Ellen responsible for orchestrating 2 separate contract offenses within 6 months. She had eliminated both her husband and the man she hired to take his life, believing this would make her incidents undetectable. The investigation eventually uncovered Mary Ellen's involvement in both incidents. Police discovered the connections between the individuals affected and traced the incidents back to Mary Ellen through witness testimony and physical evidence. One particularly damaging piece of evidence was a photograph of Mary Ellen posing naked on top of a pile of cash, which prosecutors called blood money from her husband's death. The image showed her celebration of profiting from Bashamab's offense and became key evidence demonstrating her callous attitude. Mary Ellen was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree offense for the deaths of both Bashamuels and Robert Bernstein. The prosecution argued that she had orchestrated both incidents purely for financial gain, showing complete disregard for human life in pursuit of money. During her trial, Mary Ellen maintained her innocence and claimed she was being framed. She portrayed herself as a loving wife, devastated by her husband's death with no involvement in either offense. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecution presented testimony from Gail and other associates describing how Mary Ellen had recruited them to carry out the offenses. They demonstrated her financial motive and methodical planning of both attacks. The blood money photograph particularly damaged her credibility with the jury. After hearing all evidence, the jury found Mary Ellen Samuels guilty of both counts of first-degree offense on July 1, 1994. During the penalty phase, the prosecution emphasized that she had orchestrated 2 separate contract offenses purely for money. On September 1, 1994, Superior Court Judge Michael R. Hoff sentenced Mary Ellen Samuels to death by lethal injection. She became known as one of California's most notorious Black Widow cases due to her willingness to eliminate multiple people for financial gain. Samuels has been on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla for over 30 years. Her appeals have been largely unsuccessful, with courts consistently upholding her conviction and sentence. Carlette Elizabeth Parker was a woman whose difficult past would lead to a horrific incident that landed her on North Carolina's death row. Parker had endured severe childhood trauma, including years of sexual abuse that left lasting psychological scars. Despite this troubled background, nothing could excuse what she would do to an innocent elderly woman. On May 12, 1998, Parker kidnapped and drowned 86-year-old Alice Covington. At the time of her death, Covington was a frail woman who stood just 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed only 88 pounds. The elderly individual affected was completely defenseless against Parker's attack. Parker had been stealing money from Covington when the elderly woman discovered the theft. Rather than face the consequences of her stealing, Parker decided to silence Covington permanently. The crime was as cowardly as it was brutal, a young, strong woman attacking a defenseless elderly person. Parker kidnapped Covington from her home, taking the terrified elderly woman to a location where she could carry out her deadly plan without interruption. Covington was completely helpless against Parker's assault and had no way to defend herself or escape. Parker then drowned Covington, holding the elderly woman underwater until she could no longer breathe. The method was particularly cruel because it would have caused Covington to experience terror and suffering as she fought for air. Parker showed no mercy to an individual affected who posed no physical threat to her. After drowning Covington, Parker disposed of the body and tried to cover up evidence of her incident. She hoped that by eliminating the only witness to her theft, she could escape consequences for both the stealing and the offense. Parker's actions showed calculated cruelty rather than impulsive violence. The investigation began when Covington was reported missing by concerned family members and friends. Police discovered evidence of Parker's theft from Covington and identified her as a suspect in the elderly woman's disappearance. The evidence quickly led investigators to focus on Parker. When Parker was arrested and tried, prosecutors called her a planner, a schemer, and a murderer. The evidence showed that Parker had not only stolen from Covington but had deliberately planned to eliminate her to avoid being caught. Parker was sentenced to death in 1999 for the kidnapping and murder. Although her defense attorney pointed to her difficult childhood marked by sexual abuse, the jury opted for a death sentence instead of life in prison. Parker has been on North Carolina's death row for over 25 years. Her case represents the tragic intersection of childhood trauma and adult violence. But courts have consistently ruled that her background does not excuse the brutal offense of an innocent elderly woman. Donna Marie Roberts was born on May 22, 1944, and became the only woman on Ohio's death row after conspiring to take the life of her ex-husband Robert Finger Hutt for insurance money. Roberts was 57 years old when she orchestrated one of the most calculated insurance fraud offenses in Ohio history. Roberts and Finger Hutt were divorced but continued living together in Howland Township. Despite their failed marriage, Roberts maintained life insurance policies on Finger Hutt worth over $500,000. She saw these policies as her path to financial freedom if Finger Hutt was eliminated. Roberts was having an affair with Nathaniel Jackson, a prison inmate. Their relationship would become the foundation for a deadly conspiracy. In 19 recorded phone conversations and nearly 300 letters exchanged while Jackson was in correctional facility, the two concocted the scheme to take Finger Hutt's life. The plan was simple but deadly. Jackson would carry out the physical attack on Finger Hutt while Roberts provided information and support. In return, they would split the insurance proceeds and could be together after Jackson was released from correctional facility. In December 2001, Jackson carried out the plan by shooting and unaliving Finger Hutt at his Fond du Lac Drive home. The attack was made to look like a botched robbery, with Jackson taking some items to support the burglary theory. Initially, police treated Finger Hutt's death as a random home invasion, but investigators began noticing odd details that did not fit a typical burglary. The insurance policies and Roberts' behavior raised suspicions that this was not a random incident. Authorities obtained evidence of the conspiracy through the recorded phone calls and letters between Roberts and Jackson. The communications showed clear planning and intent to eliminate Finger Hutt for the insurance money. Roberts was arrested and charged with aggravated offense and conspiracy. She was convicted of aggravated offense in early 2003 for her role in orchestrating Finger Hutt's death. Jackson was also convicted and sentenced to death for carrying out the actual attack. The Ohio Supreme Court affirmed Roberts' death penalty sentence by a 6-1 vote, ruling that the state presented proof beyond a reasonable doubt of her guilt. The evidence of premeditation and financial motive made her case particularly strong for prosecutors. Now 79 years old, Roberts remains the only woman on Ohio's death row. Her case has gone through multiple appeals and resentencing hearings, but she continues to face the death penalty for her role in orchestrating Finger Hutt's offense. Roberts' case represents one of the most clear-cut examples of murder for hire motivated by insurance money. The extensive documentation of her conspiracy with Jackson through letters and phone calls provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of premeditated offense for financial gain. Lisa Marie Montgomery was a 36-year-old woman from Kansas who committed one of the most horrific federal incidents in recent history. Montgomery had been lying to her boyfriend Kevin Montgomery about being pregnant, even going so far as to fake a pregnancy for months to keep him from leaving her. By December 2004, Montgomery's lies were about to be exposed. She desperately needed a baby to maintain her deception. Montgomery began searching online pregnancy forums and found her target as 23-year-old Bobby Jo Stinnett of Skidmore, Missouri, who was 8 months pregnant with her first child. Stinnett was excited about becoming a mother and was active in dog breeding communities online. Montgomery contacted Stinnett under false pretenses, claiming she was interested in buying a puppy. The two women arranged to meet at Stinnett's home on December 16, 2004. When Montgomery arrived at Stinnett's house, she strangled the pregnant woman until she lost consciousness. Montgomery then used a kitchen knife to cut open Stinnett's abdomen and remove her unborn baby daughter. When Stinnett regained consciousness during the attack, Montgomery strangled her to death. Montgomery took the baby and fled to Kansas, attempting to pass the child off as her own newborn. She called her husband and told him she had given birth. But investigators quickly traced the incident back to Montgomery through her online communications with Stinnett. The baby survived the horrific attack and was returned to Stinnett's family. Montgomery was arrested and charged with federal kidnapping resulting in death, making her eligible for the federal death penalty. During her trial, Montgomery's defense team presented evidence of her severe mental illness and history of childhood sexual abuse. They argued that she was not mentally competent and suffered from severe psychological disorders that affected her ability to understand right from wrong. But the prosecution successfully argued that Montgomery had planned the attack and knew exactly what she was doing. The jury found her guilty and sentenced her to death. Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on January 13, 2021, becoming the first woman executed by the federal government in 67 years. Her execution was controversial, with many advocates arguing that her severe mental illness should have prevented her from being executed. The case highlighted ongoing debates about mental illness and the death penalty in America. Angela Jane Johnson was a 29-year-old woman involved in the drug trade when she participated in one of Iowa's most shocking mass offenses. On July 5, 1993, Johnson and her boyfriend Dustin Honkin carried out a home invasion in Mason City, Iowa that would leave 4 people deceased, including 2 young children. The attack was motivated by drugs and money. Honkin was a methamphetamine dealer who believed that Laurie Duncan had stolen drugs or money from him. Duncan was staying at the home with her boyfriend Bobby Bobber and his 2 young children, 10-year-old Candace Bobber and 6-year-old Amber Bobber. Johnson and Honkin planned to collect the drugs or money they believed Duncan owed them. But their plan quickly turned deadly when they decided to eliminate all witnesses to their incident. The couple showed no mercy toward anyone in the home, including the innocent children. During the home invasion, Johnson and Honkin systematically unalived all 4 individuals in the house. They shot Duncan, Bobber, and both children execution style, leaving no survivors to identify them or testify about what had happened. The attack was cold-blooded and calculated. After taking the lives of all 4 individuals, Johnson and Honkin disposed of the bodies in remote locations to hide evidence of their incidents. They believed that by eliminating all witnesses and hiding the bodies, they could avoid being caught and prosecuted for their actions. The investigation began when the individuals were reported missing by concerned family members. Police discovered evidence of violence at the home and began searching for the missing family. Eventually, the bodies were found, and the investigation led to Johnson and Honkin. Johnson was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree offense. The prosecution argued that she had actively participated in planning and carrying out the execution-style offenses of 4 innocent people, including 2 young children, who had done nothing wrong. During her trial, Johnson's defense team tried to portray her as being under Honkin's influence and control. They argued that she had been manipulated by him and was not the primary perpetrator of the violence. But the evidence showed that Johnson had been an active participant in the planning and execution of the incidents. The jury found Angela Johnson guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree offense. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection, becoming the only woman on Iowa's death row. Honkin was also convicted and sentenced to death for his role in the incidents. Johnson has been on death row for over 30 years, fighting her conviction and sentence through various appeals. She remains at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women, where she continues to exhaust her legal options while serving her death sentence. Robin Lee Rowe was a 34-year-old mother living in Boise, Idaho when financial problems and greed led her to orchestrate the deaths of her own family members. Rowe had been separated from her husband Randy Rowe, but both she and the children were facing financial difficulties. Rowe saw her family's life insurance policies as a solution to her money problems. On February 10, 1992, Rowe deliberately set fire to the duplex where her estranged husband and 2 children were sleeping. Randy Rowe, age 34, and her children Joshua Cornelier, 10, and Tabitha Cornelier, 8, were all asleep in their upstairs bedrooms when the fire began in the early morning hours. Rowe had not been staying at the residence at the time of the fire, instead staying at a friend's house. This gave her an alibi while her family perished in the flames. All 3 individuals affected passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning, as smoke filled their bedrooms while they slept. When firefighters arrived at the burning duplex, they found the 3 bodies upstairs, Initially, the fire appeared to be an accident or possibly caused by faulty wiring. Rowe played the role of a devastated mother and wife who had lost her entire family in a tragic incident. But fire investigators determined that the blaze had been deliberately set using an accelerant. The burn patterns and evidence at the scene showed that someone had intentionally started the fire on the first floor of the duplex. The investigation focused on who had access to the home and motive to harm the family. Rowe quickly became the primary suspect when investigators learned about the life insurance policies on her family members and her financial problems. They discovered that Rowe stood to collect significant insurance money from the deaths of her husband and children. Rowe was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree offense and 1 count of aggravated arson. The prosecution argued that she had coldly calculated that her family was worth more to her deceased than alive, and had deliberately set the fire while they slept to collect the insurance money. During her trial, Rowe maintained her innocence and claimed she had no involvement in setting the fire. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, including forensic proof that the fire was deliberately set and her obvious financial motive for wanting her family deceased. Rowe was convicted and sentenced to death, becoming the only woman on Idaho's death row. She has been fighting her conviction and death sentence for over 30 years through various appeals. Rowe remains at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, where she continues to maintain her innocence while exhausting her legal options. Patricia Blackmon appeared to be a caring woman who wanted to help children. In 1998, she adopted a 2-year-old girl named Dominica Bryant through the Alabama Department of Human Resources. For months, social workers visited their mobile home in Dothan, Alabama, and observed what seemed like a loving relationship between Patricia and her adopted daughter. But behind closed doors, something very different was happening. Dominica was being systematically abused by the woman who was supposed to protect her. The little girl suffered injuries that were both new and old, showing a pattern of violence that had been going on for some time. On the evening of May 29, 1999, Patricia's father-in-law Wayne Johnson saw Dominica playing normally at his house. The child seemed happy and was acting like any normal 2-year-old. Around 8 p.m., Patricia and Dominica left his house to return to their mobile home. What happened in the next hour and a half would end Dominica's young life. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Patricia called 911 in what seemed like panic. She told the emergency operator that her child was not breathing and needed immediate help. Paramedic Eddie S. Smith rushed to the mobile home and found a scene that shocked him. Dominica was lying on the bedroom floor, wearing only a diaper and blood-soaked socks. She was covered in vomit and was not breathing. Smith immediately noticed severe injuries on the little girl. There was a large hematoma on her forehead and blood on her chest. Most disturbing was what appeared to be the imprint of a shoe sole on her tiny chest. Dominica was rushed to Flowers Hospital, but it was too late. She was pronounced deceased at 10:22 p.m. Dr. Robert Head and Dr. Matthew Christa examined Dominica at the hospital. Both doctors were horrified by what they found. The child had multiple bruises and contusions all over her body. Even more troubling, they could see marks from previous injuries that had been healing, indicating ongoing abuse. The medical examiner, Dr. Alfredo Parad, conducted the autopsy and discovered the full extent of Dominica's suffering. The child had sustained over 30 separate injuries to her head, chest, abdomen, and extremities. She had fractures to her leg and skull. There were parallel bruises that looked like train tracks across her body. Dominica had been beaten with multiple objects over an extended period. Dr. Parad determined that Dominica passed away from multiple blunt force injuries. The cause of death was massive trauma from being beaten, kicked, and stomped. The shoe imprint on her chest matched the sandals Patricia was wearing when police arrived. Evidence also suggested that Dominica had been beaten with a pool cue. Investigators searched Patricia's mobile home and found blood-splattered evidence throughout. A broken pool cue tested positive for Dominica's blood, as did several pieces of clothing and bedding. The forensic evidence painted a clear picture of extreme violence against a helpless child. Patricia tried to maintain her innocence, claiming she had no idea how Dominica sustained her injuries. She suggested the child might have fallen or hurt herself while playing, but the medical evidence contradicted every explanation she offered. The injuries were far too severe and numerous to be accidental. During the investigation, the timeline became clear. Dominica was healthy and playing normally when she left her grandfather's house at 8 p.m. By 9:30 p.m., she was deceased from massive trauma. Patricia was the only adult with the child during this time period, and she could not explain how such severe injuries occurred. The prosecution argued that Patricia had lost control and beaten Dominica to death in a fit of rage. They suggested that the stress of caring for a young child, combined with possible financial pressures, had pushed Patricia over the edge. The evidence showed that this was not a one-time incident, but the culmination of ongoing abuse. Patricia's defense team tried to portray her as a loving adoptive mother who had been trying to help a child in need. They brought witnesses who testified that Patricia and Dominica seemed to have a good relationship. Neighbors said they trusted Patricia with their own children and had never seen signs of violence. But the physical evidence was overwhelming. The jury heard testimony about Dominica's extensive injuries and the pattern of abuse. They saw photos of the blood-spattered mobile home and the broken pool cue. Most importantly, they heard how a healthy child had sustained fatal injuries while alone with Patricia. In 2002, the jury found Patricia Blackmun guilty of a capital offense under Alabama law, which makes it a capital crime to intentionally take the life of a child under 14 years of age. During the penalty phase, the prosecution argued that Dominica's death was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel because of the extended torture the child had endured. The jury voted 10-2 to recommend death, and the judge followed their recommendation. Patricia Blackmun was sentenced to death by lethal injection. She became one of the longest-serving individuals on Alabama's death row, having been there since August 2002. Patricia has exhausted most of her appeals and remains at the Julia Tutwiler Correctional Facility for Women in WTMP, Alabama. Her case serves as a tragic reminder of how those entrusted to care for children can sometimes become their worst threat.